I'd like to invite Brian Robinson to the stage. He's the Chief Technical Officer of Great British Nuclear. Brian.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Brian Robinson, Chief Technical Officer of Great British Energy Nuclear. It doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily as Great British Nuclear, but so I've been involved with GBN for about 4 years now, starting with some sort of pro bono work for Gwen Perry Jones and Simon Bowen as they were endeavoring to set up GBN. All the way through a secondment, and then taking a permanent role as the Chief Technical Officer. So I've sort of been with them for almost from the beginning, and it has been one of the most difficult and also the most exciting job that I've had in close to 40 years in the nuclear industry. So, and I want to talk about that a little bit, about what has given me that sense of optimism. And by the end of this presentation, what I hope I'll leave you with is a similar sense of optimism that this is not another false start for the nuclear industry, that we are actually moving towards something that's really exciting and really important for the nation. So with that, I thought I would start with a slide that came out of a presentation that I did almost 3 years ago. And this is the backdrop, and I call it the problem statement. You know, what was facing us 3 years ago or 4 years ago? And the reason I want to highlight this is because when you're kind of in the middle of something, you sort of lose track of the progress that you're making. You're always focused on what's still missing, what's not yet done, what you need to do to make something happen. And you sort of lose track of the progress you've made. But towards the end of 2022, what nuclear looked like in the UK was a pretty, I would say, dark kind of view of nuclear in the UK. Through the 50s, all the way up into the 80s, there was a really good track record of building new nuclear generation in the UK. But after that, it has just been a slow decline of units coming offline, units starting to go into decommissioning, and very few new nuclear projects being launched. Sizewell, we have Sizewell and Hinkley going on. We had Horizon, which then was canceled. So it was really not looking very positive for nuclear. It looked like what nuclear would mean for the UK is decommissioning, waste management, and a couple EPRs running, and that was it. So taking it from almost 30% of the power being generated in the UK from nuclear to just having a couple units, it was really a really, I would say, depressing view of nuclear. So that was the problem. And that was presented to Boris Johnson. Since then, we've had a lot of prime ministers, but this really kind of kicked off with a few. Sort of kicked off of a study by Simon Bowen was the lead. It was called, some people call it the Simon Bowen Report, other people call it the Sprint Report. But that came out and basically said, look, there is a market failure. What is not happening is the government is not putting in place the things that need to be in place to stimulate new nuclear, and there needs to be an intervention. So we started talking about it as a market failure and interventions being needed. And so there's a lot of interventions, but I want to talk about 3 particular interventions that I think are significant. One is the creation of Great British Energy Nuclear. The other is the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force, and then the launch of an advanced nuclear framework. So I'm going to quickly talk through each of those. So GBN, every year we get a letter from the Secretary of State that says, this is what we want you to do. This is what your mission is for the next year. And for the last 2 years, it's been very consistent. It's around three sort of pillars. They want us to deliver projects. They want us to enable the industry to be able to deliver those projects in an efficient way. And part of that enabling is advice. They want advice as to what's getting in the way and what the government can do to help enable the industry to be successful. And it doesn't just, although it's probably been in the press more heavily the SMR project at Wilva. And so a lot of people do sort of associate GBN with SMRs, but really our mission is broader than that. It is gigawatt projects, the next gigawatt project in the country, advanced nuclear technologies, yes, SMRs, and also we have a responsibility to facilitate bringing both public and private financing to the industry to help support the delivery of projects. So what does that look like in practice? So starting with delivery. So what we already do and will continue to do is buy sites. So buy sites that we then allocate to projects to develop nuclear generation projects. Right now, our strategy is to allocate, not to sell. And I think that makes sense right now because we haven't identified enough sites to be really confident that there's enough sites to deliver enough projects to meet our ambitions. So for right now, we intend to buy them and then allocate them to credible projects so that they can build on. We run competitions for technologies. We started with SMRs. Rolls-Royce was successful in winning the first SMR competition. And so we will run more technology competitions in the future as more projects get approved by government. We established DevCos, development companies, to actually run those projects all the way through commissioning. And the idea is that once we have moved through those really high risk portions of a project, that private finance would come towards those projects and want to take them over and operate them. But what we weren't waiting for is private finance to come in before we launched a project. So we will fund the projects through those high risk periods. And then when the risk profile is investable, we intend to sell those projects off to operators and to be the long-term licensees. And then again, the public and private financing, trying to identify, what is it that makes it attractive, and again, try to accelerate that through the project as much as possible. Enabling, lots of things, and so that I kind of put enabling and advice together, but it very much comes to, identifying what is getting in the way, what can government do, what can industry do, and what can government do to help industry identify and remove blockers. And a few things. I mean, the most obvious is finding land is a big one. A lot of people feel like EN6 sites, well, those are the obvious choices. But the EN6 sites were selected quite a while ago when the rules were different and the technologies were different. And so they're not necessarily the best sites for new nuclear projects. So we're in the process of, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we're in the process of putting together a paper to advise government as to where do we think actually the best place to build new nuclear is, and seeking to get approval to go buy those sites and then allocate them to more projects. Anything else on this? Yeah, just a couple other things to highlight on this. Given that we think somewhere between 12 and 24 gigawatts of nuclear is going to be needed by the country by 2050, it doesn't make sense that we would just allow each project to just, have to fend for themselves for fuel, for operators, things like that. So we're also in the process of working with DESNZ to come up with a national fuel strategy, particularly sourced from the UK, possibly all elements of the fuel cycle in the UK, as well as operators, to do something to look at it as a national imperative to identify, attract and train operators so that we have a common standard and they can move amongst the different projects more effectively than just each individual project coming up with how they train their operators, how they attract their operators. So we're involved with those kind of things to help government. The second thing is the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force. So the Bowen report identified a market failure. At a very high level, it talked about some of the things that were getting in the way of new nuclear, but it really didn't dig into, I would say, really getting into what really is it. And so John Fingleton was asked to lead a task force to look at it. And at the time, the view was it's the regulator. The regulator's the problem. But very quickly, the focus of that assessment identified it's not just the regulator, it's the ecosystem. It's government, the regulator, industry. It's far more complicated than that. And so he set about to do a study that identified what could be done, what's getting in the way, and what could be done to address those fundamental issues in that ecosystem. And so he issued a report. Oh, I got that date wrong, 2026, 2025. Late last year, he issued a report, had close to 50 recommendations in 7 key areas, and it really identified, if you address these things, then it should make it more attractive and should be easier to deliver projects in an efficient way. Predictable projects are investable projects, and then it all starts to come together. And so that came out, and the what's today? Yeah, the current prime minister said, I want those recommendations converted into clear actions with clear delivery dates that will support the industry in 2 years. And what that did is it did something that I haven't seen since I've been here. I've been here 14 years working in the UK. And it forced everybody to sit down together and say, how are we going to do this? Because they're so complex, the issues, you can't do them in isolation. And so the regulator, government, Treasury, DESNZ, DBT, everybody now is working together, looking at those recommendations, saying, how do we together come up with some action that will address these issues and we'll be able to deliver that recommendation. And so it's really exciting to see that. So GBN have been in the middle of all that, both in inputting into the report, when that report came out, advising DESNZ as to who do we need to get together, how do we do this. These are the things we think we could lead on. These are the things we think government should lead on, and there's some that the regulator needs to lead on. And so we are really quickly moving towards a highly collaborative approach to delivering the recommendations from the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force report. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about is, yes, generation 18, 12, 24, whatever it is kind of our primary mission in GBN. It is to put gigawatts into service. However, there's a huge importance on advanced nuclear technologies for the country because of the types of industries that the UK wants to attract. And so what we didn't want to do is say, well, we'll get to that eventually. And so what's been launched is a framework. And what the framework does is it allows developers or prospective developers to come to the government with a clear place to ask questions and to get advice. So a lot of what we heard and what was highlighted in the Fingleton report was that industry didn't know who to talk to in the UK government. And so what this does is gives a clear point of entry to say, look, bring your plan, your development plan to us. We'll assess it and do 2 things. We'll provide you advice back as to, we believe these parts of your plan are credible. We think these parts probably, could be problematic for you. You need to put some more effort into that. So it's great for the developers. For us and for the industry, it's great because we have sight of sort of where people are in putting together a project. So so we talk about a pipeline of these are the people that have expressed interest formally. This is the level of maturity and credibility of their plans. And so again, the supply chain and the industry can choose to approach and align with the projects that they think are suited for the products and services that they're looking to supply the nuclear industry. So again, it's another indication that the government now is leaning into actually supporting and enabling new projects, as opposed to the previous approach was let the market decide what needs to be built and what needs to be built when. Because right now, we need energy, and right now we need energy security. We need to be certain that that we can control it. And so another item. I'm doing okay on time, so I didn't know if I was going to get to these slides. So I'm going to talk about one more thing. So there are some things that I think should give the industry and should give the supply chain confidence that that what we're saying is going to happen is going to actually happen. And so a lot of people see in the news the SMR project at Wilva, and it might look like, well, that's just 1.5 gigawatts. It's just 3 units. That's really not, it's really just a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. And it's certainly not enough to convince a supply chain to really tool up and invest heavily in manufacturing facilities. What you don't see is the business case that underpins the launch of that first project. And it wasn't a business case that said we want to do 3 SMR units at Wilva. It was a program business case that said we need to build fleets of SMRs in the UK. And if you build fleets of SMRs a certain way, they offer a value that's comparable and potentially better than other technologies like gigawatt or oil and gas. And so, it's around the fundamentals of standardized design as much as possible so that site-specific influences are minimized. That allows you to modularize it and then manufacture a significant portion of that off-site, which makes it more predictable. To deploy projects with a drumbeat so that there's no gaps. So instead of just building 3, everybody demobilizes, then you launch another project and you sit and plan it and design it for another 5 years, and you've got a gap in your manufacturing slots, you've got a gap in knowledge. People move on to other industries because they can't sit around for 5 years waiting for another job to come up. So it talks about, if you do it this way, that we believe it offers value that you can't get from other technologies. And one of the big ones is decision making. And the decision making based on a fleet. Having the stomach to invest in the first units and possibly spend more money on the first units to get the standard design, to get things modularized, to get factories built, yeah, that's going to make per gigawatt more expensive than other technologies. But the payoff is in the fleet, not in each individual project. And so the business case was presented, that view. And really importantly, it was approved by DESNZ, the Secretary of State, as well as Treasury, which is probably the most important because they're the ones that give us money. So all approved and agreed. So a couple other things, watching the time, I apologize. So there's a couple other things that should give confidence to the industry. One is in the autumn, NESO is going to put out their spatial energy plan, which will say, this is the amount of electricity we need in the UK, this is how much is going to come from nuclear, and this is where it should come. GBN has been tasked with a siting report that says, here are the credible sites to build new nuclear. Also, at Wilva, you'll see a DCO that's been put in that doesn't just talk about the first 3 units. It's going to be DCO for the fleet. It's going to be DCO that covers enabling works for the fleet. And you'll be able to see us spending money far beyond the first 3 units on that first project. And then the Fingleton report wanted a stronger statement from government. I can't guarantee that's going to come, but we think it will come, to be really clear on the back of the NESO report to say, this is what we're going to go do. So hopefully those things will give confidence to the industry that this is happening, and investment in manufacturing facilities, investment in people is well worth the time.